Okay. So we're just going to open this one particular image in Photoshop. And I would say there's two brushes that I use the most in Photoshop. The one brush is just like your standard round brush with maybe some softer, like soft hardness. And then the other one is a grass brush. And so this grass brush that I use personally really like helps soften the edges when I have like particularly like landscape installations that are set in the grass in some sort of leafy area. So it helps kind of soften that point of contact. And so it's pretty easy to make brushes once you kind of learn how to do it. So the first thing we're going to do here is we have this white background and we want to remove that white background. So we just have the shapes of the grass. So we've kind of gone over all like the nice ways of quickly selecting things and removing them. But because this is a brush, we don't have to be very particular. And so a really fast way to do it is just to go to select, color range, use the eyedropper to select that white in the background and press OK. So this should clean up the grass fairly well. And we will create a mask, Control Z, and inverse that selection, Shift Control I. I'm gonna write that down. And let's make that mask now. So now this has been pretty cleaned up. And again, it doesn't have to be super clean or fancy. We could do right away we could just immediately delete all those pieces of white, but I like to just create that mask right away, just so I can like double check that I had kind of cleaned up the shapes that I want before I completely start to like ruin the original image. But once I like it, I will apply layer mask, and essentially that's kind of solidifying that cutout of the grass. And then what I find, so well, I'll show you what would happen right now. So what we do is we go to Edit, Define Brush, so we make sure we have our image selected. Go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. And you can see that here we have this little brush panel where we can name our grass and save it. But if you notice right now, that grass almost has like a little bit of a gradient to it. So I will just type in gradient grass. And so for the way that I personally use these brushes, that gradient is, I think, going to kind of get in the way. I'd rather have kind of like that perfect cutout of the grass. So we'll save this, but then I'll show you the edit. Oh, you can see right away that that brush shape pops up. But because of that opacity, if we tried to use it as like an eraser, for example, we can test it too. Maybe I'm wrong. But let's make a mask. Okay, we'll make this just a little bit smaller. All right, so it's barely noticeable. But I'm gonna just play it safe, and I'll show you the next kind of level of treatment to add to a brush. Just to make sure that like when we are working with 100% opacity and we use this brush, then we have kind of like that clean shape of the grass. And so the reason this happened was when we made that brush preset, it applied a essentially a black and white filter to the grass, and then used that kind of black and white information as the shape of the grass. So if we want just kind of a clean cut grass shape, we want to apply a perfectly solid black color on top of this grass. So how I do that is I right click the layer, I go to blending options, and I'll do color overlay. I'll change that color here to black and press OK. Now, when I go to edit, define brush preset, you can see that that's now a full, that there's no gradient. It's full white. So I already have one grass brush. I'm going to call this grass 2. I'm going to press OK. So go back to make our mask again. Change the size. We've got a little bit more of a solid one, and let's just go back to the grass gradient and we can just compare real quick. Okay, so barely any change, but there is definitely a small change there. So once you have that brush, what Photoshop has given us is that perfect shape of the brush, which will now be available in every Photoshop file that we use. But there's particular settings that you might make this brush a little bit more useful for you. So before we kind of close out of this and move on to the rest of the assignment, I'm just going to show you how you can adjust some of the brush settings and maybe some of the brush settings that I would apply to this brush so that it kind of works the most effectively as a tool that I like to use it as. So for me, I have brush settings on the right side here, but if you don't have it and you cannot find it, if you go to Window, you should be able to find your brush settings. Looks like there might even be a hotkey for it, F5. And see, I'm gonna open up my brush. So what the brush settings does is it kind of shows you what your brush would look like if you would just kind of click and drag. So I'm not gonna probably be using the grass gradient. I can see here's that full grass. You can really tell the difference while they're compared next to each other. So this is what it would look like if I just clicked and dragged right now. But I want to kind of use this as a way to kind of add grass texture or like remove grass texture from images. And so there's a few different things I can do to kind of, when we kind of talked about like creating some messiness and some noise to help kind of distort things, I'm going to add some settings that will help with that. So first thing I might do is I often won't use this as something that I kind of click and drag with. It's more of a kind of clicking in one spot a few times. And so I might increase that spacing just so I can kind of see how each click may differ from the last. So if we go to shape dynamics, I might shape jitter kind of changes how every time that grass is reapplied to your page, how much the size changes. And so because I'm kind of going for a little bit of a messiness, I'm going to change the size just a little bit and let that happen. I might change the angle jitter a little bit too, but not too much because grass is often kind of going up or down. Sometimes I'll play around with the flipping, definitely not the Y though, just on the X axis. I think that's something we don't have to worry about, but I'll click through a couple of these just so you can see that there's other options too. So I've seen some Photoshop folks use the dual brush, which kind of confusingly like it literally doubles up your brush. And so what we have is our grass brush is kind of the base of the brush. We have the primary brush on top of it. And you can kind of just do that to really just add on those textures. If you are, I have gone and changed the grass settings so that maybe I'm actually literally drawing like little pieces of grass in, and that's where color dynamics can be really nice. You can, when you look at a lawn from far away, it may look just like perfect green, but really it's all shades of green and yellow. You can adjust those color settings here. We'll keep that. Oh, no, yeah, we'll keep the noise on. So I think most of the settings that I like to adjust for the grass, it's just a little bit of the size, jitter, and then I like to add that flipping just to help kind of create some of that randomness that grass often seems to have. Perfect. So what that means for us is when then I'm going to just change the size a little bit. Let's get us a new. You can kind of watch now that as we click, the size is changing, the angle is changing just a little bit, and we keep having the flipping. And that's something that in a little bit in the assignment is going to become really helpful for helping us kind of place our objects into the landscape. So now that we have that, it is saved to Photoshop, so it is going to be there whenever we need it. So just for time, we're going to change directions and jump in to the assignment. So week 4 assignment is essentially placing a 3-dimensional object into the landscape. And so as I was reading over everyone's gap analysis, I saw that some folks have a lot of experience in 3D modeling, and some folks don't have any at all. And so what I decided I would do is just show you how I often will kind of create a 3D object or not create a 3D object, create how I place a 3D object in the landscape using Rhino. But I also exported the 3D object as a PNG and also the source image that I used so that folks that don't have 3D modeling software can go along with this assignment despite that. So this is just a little kind of trail stand that I made in Rhino. I have to say that I think 75% of you have already had you've had a really solid base in Rhino and actually know way more about Rhino and are way more comfortable with Rhino than I am. So I'm going to show you how I often will use it, but you may already have kind of done this and may even know a better way of doing it. So I just want to acknowledge that. So we have this 3D object here, which is a trail sign, very rudimentary, which is totally fine. But part of this assignment is placing that 3D object into our land lab photo. And so what I would do before I learned the lesson I'm about to show you all is I would click in Rhino and kind of adjust accordingly. Then I would go, to my source image and see, like, just kind of look at it, and then I would jump back to Rhino. But there's a far easier way, and that's simply by going into the properties window, and in particular, the view properties. And if you scroll way down to the bottom, there's the wallpaper tab. And the wallpaper tab allows you to essentially apply a picture or a photo to the entire kind of gray area of Rhino. And so we'll add that land lab photo into Rhino, and we'll select show. And so we have our photo here. And now we can kind of change the angles in which we're looking at the trail sign so that it kind of feels like it's in place in the land lab photo. And so when I opened this before, I had a grid all over kind of the floor of my Rhino model. And so what I believe I did was I went to grid options and I changed active viewport only. Yep, I think I selected that. And then I selected show grid lines to turn them off. And so that was able to just kind of clean up the view that I was looking at them in. So I adjust accordingly, understanding that the general scale of my model, and try to just get it so that it sort of feels like it could be like in situ. Now, for folks that are a lot more experienced in 3D modeling, you could adjust and play with the sunlight to try to get the lighting correct and the shading correct. You could also add some preliminary textures, but that's not necessary for this assignment. So to kind of give myself a little bit of a challenge, I think I'm going to change this to sort of an awkward angle as far as trying to give myself an interesting perspective to work with in Photoshop. So this looks all right to me. It could be a little bit better, but with some Photoshop altercations, I think I can really make this feel part of the landscape photo. So once I have my model in a place that I like, I will take away that photo. Careful not to adjust the viewport at all, and just do view capture to file. Click enter. Take away the grid and make sure to select transparent background. This will give us, a clean background to work with. We don't have to be working with 300 DPI, but I'm lucky enough to have a lot of space and storage on my computer, so I usually will export at 300 DPI. And when I go to export, you want to make sure that the file that you're exporting is a PNG and not a JPEG, because we want that clear background. A JPEG, there's no transparent pixels, whereas there are transparent pixels in PNG. And then you would save your object accordingly. So I already have saved this example here, so I'm not going to go all the way through. And then we're going to jump into Photoshop. So when we go in Bridge, we have our 3D sign, and we have our landscape photo. We're going to open our landscape photo in Photoshop. go back to bridge, click and drag our 3D sign into Photoshop. And we'll probably have to adjust the scale just a little bit, depending on the size of our export from Rhino. And this is looking good to me. So I always want to double check that the images that I'm editing and changing the scale of are smart objects, so that when we're adjusting the scale, we're not ruining any of those original pixels. And then before we get too far, definitely want to save our work. So the next few steps are going to be fairly repetitive, but I think that they'll be very useful just to kind of get into the motions of things. And so part of this assignment now is we're kind of like doing this coloring book like we did for the 2D rendering, but we're going to do it in a three-dimensional world. And so I went ahead and I think and I found this nice wood from the internet that I am going to work with, because what I want is sort of some changes in textures, but I also want the same tone of wood for like different faces of the wood. So having all these beams in a row kind of gives me what I'm looking for, and I can really work with that. So I'm going to click and drag that and drop it into Photoshop. We've got I made sure to get a big wood file, and it automatically made that wood file into a smart object. So I'll save that original wood file or full image just in case I need to go back and get it. I'll press Control J to duplicate it. And then I'll just kind of remove the visibility of the original wood. So I'm going to just click and drag this and make it a little bit smaller. And I think just for kind of the ease, we're going to, if you want to change your angles with, what is it called? By factors of 15, you just press Shift while you're rotating things. Oops. We're just going to kind of make this more of an approachable size for this side of our trail sign. Zoom in a little bit. And for me to kind of get an idea of making sure that that wood grain is kind of to scale with our object in the landscape, I'm going to make our wood grain a different opacity, just so I can kind of see the world behind it. And so I pressed the number 7. The opacity, you can change opacities of layers by selecting that layer, and 1 through 0 is all multiples of 10 that change the opacity of your image layer. Okay, so I'm gonna go back and make sure that's 70. And okay. So this is sort of where things can get a little bit repetitive, but this is also where the magic happens. So you could bring this object, our trail sign, in with a predefined like Rhino texture, and use this same couple of steps to just kind of make that texture feel a little bit more real. And so some of you might remember some of the talks about perspective that we had in our first term. But what I find is easiest to do is line up the edge of our image with the bottom edge of the object, the flat 3D surface, which is important. And I'll press Control and T, which opens up kind of our capabilities of transforming this image. So now we can permanently kind of transform and distort this image so it can kind of adjust to the angles in which we have our trail sign at. And the first thing I'm going to do is the scale of the grain of the wood is kind of important if we're considering that when I made these 4x4, these were 4x4s in Rhino. And so we're going to want to kind of change the width of this wood a little bit. So I'm just going to make that a lot smaller, and you have to press Shift in Photoshop in order to adjust, and they call it constrained transformation. Okay. And then when we're in the transform kind of workflow, there's a few different types of transformations that we can do. There's the skew, which you can activate by holding Control Shift. And that only allows you to slant items, your object vertically or horizontally. And so you can kind of get that to refine the angle of kind of the wood to the original beam. And then we'll go over the other ones in just a second. So once you have that looking good, because we're working with sort of this rectangle right now, it's pretty easy for us to just press M to get that marquee tool and click and drag down. And then we'll mask this. And then hit Control J. And we should probably name this face 1, face of the wood, and it's the closest one to me, face 1, face 1B. There might be better nomenclature for this. And I'm going to delete this mask so we have all the wood again. Press V for the moving tool. I'm just going to, this wood is already kind of adjusted to our angles that we want. So I'm just going to slide face 1B up so we can elongate the leg of our piece here. And once I've done that, this time, sorry, I'll press L for the lasso tool. And we want to do the same thing where we create a mask. And I'm probably not doing, I'll probably have to go back and adjust this mask a little bit later. There we go. So I'm going to select this layer, press 0 to make sure it's at 100% opacity. I'll do the same with this one. And you'll notice you can kind of see that edge there. And when that happens, I'll go to the brush and pick sort of a softer brush. And I'm working in the mask. And I'll just sort of start to blend it a little bit. And you'll notice right away that those textures kind of get blended together. And that becomes pretty difficult to tell. So we're starting to get some textures to our piece. And we'll add actually, before we add the second kind of face of this trail sign, let's just explore quick our new brush that we made. So if you just right click on the screen, you can open up the brush settings, and I'll go back to our tall grass setting. I'll bring that up a little bit, and I'll go to face 1. We'll remove our object so we can kind of see through this. And just noticing I drew a little bit. Okay. Face 1, we have our brush. I'm gonna click on that mask, which automatically gives us our black and white. And we want to go in, oh, sorry, I'll remove the 3D sign, and just kind of hit right at the base of our piece here. And we zoom in, you can already see it's working. Somehow, well, we know how because we made it, but this brush is just helping almost like give some blades, yeah, allowing those blades of grass to almost feel like they're in front of the object, even though they're actually behind the object. So this really helps blend in our piece into the landscape and help it feel like it's part of the landscape. Okay, so, but you can see how much we've kind of removed from there, which is fair. The grass is really soft, and so, you know, you'd assume that it would kind of sink into the ground there. So we have our big original piece of wood, and I'm just going to go back to that so we don't have to really mess with these faces. And maybe just for organization's sake, we can group these, Control G, select both layers and Control G. We'll name that face 1. And then going to remove that or the view of the original wood. And I'll show you the next transform tool. So as I have this selected, I'm just going to lower that opacity again. Oops, let's see. So we can kind of see through it. And we were kind of lucky with the skew tool for that first face of the wood, because although we were working with like more than like a 1 or a 2 point perspective, I believe, the skew kind of did enough for the wood to really make it feel like it was part of this piece. But we have a little bit more of a challenge with this roof here because this roof is kind of going in multiple different directions. And so that's where I like to use kind of my favorite transform tool, which is the distort tool. So I'm going to hit Control. Let's see, go back to the original, Control T. Try that again. And then I'm going to press, kind of open this up a little bit. If I press Control, it opens up the distort tool, which really allows us to kind of just freely like break any guides that Photoshop may give to us. I'm going to bring one corner over to that roof and just kind of start putting this piece of wood onto each corner of the roof here. Consistently holding the Control button down. And I'll press Enter when I'm done. And if we bring this back by pressing 0 to 100%, you can see that the distort tool really quickly and easily adjusts our image to the perspective in which our trail sign is in. This tool gives you the most amount of freedom, so it can be a little bit overwhelming, and it could be easy to kind of lose your way of where you're distorting your image. So that's, I think, one reason that folks don't always jump to it immediately. So we'll name this roof. And we'll do this second face here and maybe this main piece. And we'll see how much time we have and how we're feeling. Just gonna go over this again. Control J, duplicate that. Make it a little bit smaller. Control Shift, enter to finalize that transformation that we just made. And before I get too far into transforming, press 7 just to lower that opacity a little bit. And so this one you want to be careful of. You can see that there's just a slight angle. That may not be noticeable to change, but as you know, it's always good to do that, because any trick that we can use to kind of help something feel real is important to take advantage of. Hit Control T to start to adjust things, and we can just look at perspective to see how it works. So we're in the transform workspace. The perspective tool applies a 1-point perspective to an item, and you can kind of use that by pressing Control, Shift, and Alt. And you can kind of see that as it adjusts one angle, it can move the other one. And so if you remember from our perspective talk, if you're working with 1-point perspectives, this could be a very helpful tool to use. If you're transforming something like I am and you're not feeling happy about the way it's ending up, I think you can press, well, maybe you can't. Let's see. I thought you could press Escape, but I'll just do Control Z. Hit Control T to transform, and I'll use my favorite tool for this. So I'm just gonna really kind of aggressively adjust the overall scale and angle of this piece. Using one of the reasons I picked this wood is I can use those lines to help kind of adjust things. I just lost myself. Okay, there we are. It's kind of moving back and forth. Okay. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. Press Enter. Control J. We can just drag this straight up. If you're finding that you can't go up perfectly straight, you press Shift. It allows you just to move straight up and down. And we'll do that. And before I'm going to cut out one before I cut out the other. Press L for that lasso tool. I'm going to change the opacity of this because it looks fairly difficult to see where this ends. Okay. Okay. Okay, and we'll use that brush again, the soft brush, just to, oops. Okay, try that again. Oh, I'm doing, oops. Okay, there we go. We'll just blend that in a little bit. So last but not least, we can group these again. Control G. It's going to bring them up and out of the way of the keyboard. Paste 2. I should be able to press down here, get that grass. Oops. Always make sure you're selecting that mask. Adjust that a little bit. And then one last kind of tool I want to point out, if things are feeling like they're looking a little bit weird, we'll kind of use, I'll just introduce you to kind of 2 different ways of using this particular tool. So let's say we're looking at this right now, we're not feeling like there's enough of a contrast between face 1 and face 2. We can go and come down here. I actually don't know if new fill or it's an adjustment layer. We'll do brightness and contrast. And what we'll do is before we start to play with the editing of the adjustable layer is if we press Alt and have that adjustable layer over the group that we want to edit. So we want to edit face 2 and we press Alt, it'll apply that adjustable layer only to the layer below it. And so now when we adjust that brightness, it'll only be changing that layer and not the whole image, which is what we kind of talked about last week, is adjusting the whole image. And so you can start to sort of add some color to this, some contrast and some darkness to this to help kind of distinguish the corners of these pieces. And in addition to that, you could also do is kind of do the same thing, brightness and contrast. Lower it. See, so if I don't assign that adjustable layer to just one image, then it'll change everything. Or sorry, one layer, it'll change everything. So I'm going to lower that brightness a little bit, press Alt, and send that straight to face 1. And I didn't want to make the whole face dark. What I want to do is kind of give the illusion of a little bit of a shadow. And so this adjustable layer is a mask. And so we can treat it the same way as we've been using masks, cutting out entourage and whatnot. And so I'll use that brush to start to remove that adjustable layer until we just sort of have it right up to the top there. And that will help so that when we bring our 3D object in, so that when we start to construct the rest of this trail sign, we can start to see a little bit of shadow play, almost like our actual object or our 3-dimensional object actually has effect on the environmental lighting of this place. So what I've also did when I was kind of doing this assignment too is playing around with not even using textures, but pressing P for the pen tool and trying just to draw in some of these faces just to kind of get an idea of kind of how your shape may want to look. And by doing this, it also helps me kind of just start to explore certain ideas. Okay, only doing this. Making this fast. And let's just So if you're really excited about the like the Rhino layer that you may have, you can just sort of like draw your overlaying layer and then just like decrease the opacity a little bit and kind of add on to what you've got. Why I had done that earlier was just so that as I'm kind of like going back and forth and removing that 3D sign, just having those things drawn in really helps start to create that idea of the sign without having to have that 3D object there. So the final part of this assignment is I do ask for one entourage. And you all know how to find entourage at this point, but I just wanted to like point out something that could help you, which is just simply like when I'm thinking of an idea that I want to Photoshop in or make in Photoshop, I'll often kind of consider what elements I've already, or like entourage I've already cut out and already used, because like we've got these folks, these entourage, not cut out super nicely, but cut out nonetheless, that I don't have to go find the original image and cut them out and all that kind of stuff. So like there's nothing wrong with reusing entourage that you've used in the past. It's just important that they remain smart objects. Let's see, I should adjust a little bit. And so I do ask for one entourage in your piece. And by this end of the assignment, you should have your screenshot of your layers and your 3D rendering of an object, 3D object placed in a landscape with an entourage. And I believe that is it.